fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst, Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, welcome back to the show, Seahawks fans. It's the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. We are in our second show of the two, where we're discussing top 10 players of the Pete Carroll era. We did the offense last show. This show, we're move on to the defense. This is going to be a fun show. Lots of fun players to talk about, Keith. You're telling me up front, without knowing my list, I don't know your list, but you're saying that there could be some differences and it could be close to the top.
Yeah, I think there will be, to be honest, and not the very top one. I bet we agree on the first one. After that, though, I think there's going to be a lot of the same people, but in very different orders.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how we value players.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So last time you got to go first. Why don't you go first again? Just because I'm feeling generous.
Okay. So at the top of my list is Bobby Wagner.
Bobby Wagner, number one. Everyone's number one.
It should be. I know there's a lot of there's other popular players and there's been other great players, but Bobby Wagner has been really the center of that Seahawks defense from the moment he was drafted. He's been great player, played at a super high level, been top 3 in tackles almost every year in his career. First ballot Hall of Famer because, I mean, he was a multi-year first team All-Pro, like 7 years in a row or something. I mean, there's been very few, if any, that have ever been better than him at his position. And
so, played in 151 games, started 150 of them. Really didn't have injuries until the last game of the season this year. And then a few games missed in 2014. Other than that, he's just been stellar.
Got an MVP vote in 2014 because of those games that he missed, because the defense was bad. He came back from injury and they went back to being great and just elite. And that garnered enough attention for him to get an MVP vote, something that Russell Wilson has never had.
Yeah, that's crazy. Plus, what, five or six All-Pro, first team All-Pros.
I think it's up to 7, but Pro Bowl just every year.
Crazy. 1,383 combined tackles, which is just crazy in 11 seasons. Yeah, there's just no question. He's a Hall of Famer. He's going to be in the Ring of Honor. He's the best defensive player, arguably, that I think the Seahawks have ever had.
Cortez Kennedy will have a lot to say about that. But he's at least
accolade wise, I mean, he's surpassed everything, really.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Like I said,
I know you love Cortez, and I do too.
I do.
But
if Wagner is not number 1, then he's number 2. I mean, that's the thing as far as defensive players all time in franchise history. And there's been some great defensive players in this franchise's history, which will give you an idea of where Wagner sits. So let's go with your number 2.
Yeah, because this is where
I think I'm going to be different from you. So you go ahead and lead it off for number 2.
Well, after much thought, I placed Earl Thomas as number 2. A defensive player in the Pete Carroll era overall on my list for a lot of different reasons, but I think he's the best player beyond Bobby Wagner, even though he kind of left. It was a little turbulent, but beyond all of that, if you just look at the play on the field, he affected games more, I think, arguably, than even Cam Chancellor. I'm saying in the back end, man, that stuff, the way that the entire defense was keyed on his play, made the difference for me.
See, this is where I told you that right from the top, this is where we're going to, because I have Cam Chancellor as my number 2. Now, Earl Thomas has the first team all pros. He's got all of that. And yes, the defensive scheme was kind of built around his ability to do things that only Earl Thomas can do. But the defense really worked because of Cam Chancellor. The way that he was able to just dominate the middle of the field. And nobody wanted to play against Seattle because they didn't want Cam Chancellor to kill them. The fact that he, wasn't convicted of murder multiple times for some of those hits. He essentially ended Vernon Davis's career with that hit because the guy was never brutal. The same.
No.
We talked about Lynch in our last episode being this tone setter that everybody keyed on. Cam was that on the defense. He was also the captain. He was the defensive captain, not Wagner, and Wagner took over that role once, Cam's injury forced him off the field. But Cam was the captain, not Earl, not any of the other guys. It was Cam Chancellor. That's why I gave him my number 2, despite the fact that Earl Thomas is the more celebrated player. Okay, Earl Thomas is my number 3, but yeah, go with that.
Well, that's interesting. It's because we diverge yet again. So my 2 was Earl, and then my number 3 was Richard Sherman.
Yeah,
and I think that to me, and I put Cam 4th. So let's have this debate about these 3 players, because this is a debate. This is a debate that you have with Earl Thomas, Richard Sherman, and Cam Chancellor, because all 3 of those guys are going to be always thought as being together.
They're the Legion of Boom.
Legion of Boom. And who affected the team more is basically what we're saying, because it's more of, it doesn't necessarily come down to stats. It doesn't necessarily come down to accolades. It comes down to effect. Like, what effect did they have on the team? And you mentioned a lot of character things. You mentioned a lot of captain, that sort of thing, the hits, the individual plays that Cam Chancellor had that established him as being this larger than life character on that defense that affected games just from a psychological standpoint. And I'm saying that Richard Sherman affected games not only from a psychological standpoint, but he was just a freaking amazing defensive back, a cornerback that literally changed the prototype of cornerbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, him and Brandon Brown are, the first 2 cornerbacks of the Legion, because that's, Pete Carroll wanted size and length and physicality, and it's weird that he's gone away from that, but he has. Richard Sherman was that guy, and he's got all those first team all pros, and we're debating 3 Hall of Famers to say which one was the most Hall of Fame worthy, right? And Sherman was the loudest. He was the guy that went on that scorched earth tour, after the 2012 season during the off season. And that's the whole, like, I'm better at life than you interview and all of that kind of stuff. So he was always out there and super vocal. But when it comes down to, there were times when he wouldn't have been on the field if Cam Chancellor hadn't been over there keeping Richard Sherman's emotions in check so that he could continue to stay focused and play. Because there were multiple times where you saw Sherman walking up and down the sidelines, yelling at any coach that would listen to him, and not focused on football. And it had to be always Cam that went and talked him off the ledge and got him back out there on the field. And so was Sherman the better individual player? Yeah. But who was more important to the success of the team? I'd still say it was Cam, because without Cam, you only get 80% of Richard Sherman.
Interesting. I would have said without Earl Thomas, you would have 80% of Richard Sherman. So I think they go together.
Well,
they just go together.
Without Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor isn't as dominant a player because Cam had deficiencies in his game.
Backwards. Backwards.
Yes, that Earl Thomas made up for all the time. And it allowed Cam to be Cam. And that's part of the reason why Cam was so good. So in reality, you've got all three of these guys they're intertwined.
Yeah.
That none of them, Sherman was never as good.
No, because
after he left Seattle,
because Earl Thomas was in the back and he didn't, so he could play more aggressive.
And part of it was the injury, the Achilles injury that happened when he left Seattle and all of that. And Cam Chancellor had that neck injury and retired, I swear, like 5 years too early. And then the whole weird exit with Earl Thomas and everything that happened after he left, which was even more bizarre.
And continues even now.
Yeah. There's some additional stuff in the news lately, but those three were the fabric of what made that 2013 defense.
Yeah. Plus
one of the top
Bobby
defenses
Wagner.
in NFL history.
Yeah. Plus Bobby Wagner, plus the players that we're going to talk about here coming up in the next 3 or 4.
So after Sherman, who's your next?
Well, this list is now interesting. We're now into the meat and bones of the list. This is kind of where individual role players now in some of these great defenses that have been in the Pete Carroll era start to propagate. And my first guy is Michael Bennett.
Interesting. I had a feeling he was going to be in this spot for you.
Yeah, and I went back and forth between Cliff Avril and Michael Bennett, and I just felt like Michael Bennett had more of an effect on more games than virtually any other player that's remaining that I could have put on this list.
Yeah, no, I'll give it to. I mean, he had huge impacts on a lot of games. I think he was also very vocal, and it was very easy for media members to focus on him because he would always give an interview and always do those things. And he was out in front of the camera and riding a police officer's bicycle after a playoff game and, those kind of things. But when it comes down to like actual stats and what they do and whatever, Cliff Avril was never in front of a camera. He was never a guy that wanted attention. He just went out and produced, and he was very consistent in that production.
He was a turnover generating machine too. He knew how to punch out footballs better than almost anybody in the league.
He was years. A strip sack master. And that's why it was the fumbles that he created that put Cliff Avril as my next one, which I thought I would get pushback from you on because I'm putting him over a lot of other really important players. But he was far better than I think a lot of people realize because he didn't want attention.
Yeah. He just went out and did his job.
He did it really, really
as a Leo, he just was excellent at it. He just was. And the team's still looking for that replacement.
To the point where they've changed defenses because they haven't been able to find it.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So who's your number 7? Or who's your number 6? I should say. So you had Michael Bennett and Cliff Avril?
No, I had Cliff Avril, and then I had someone else before I get to Michael Bennett.
Okay.
KJ Wright.
Yeah. Yeah. He's number 7. So I have Michael Bennett, Cliff Avril, and KJ Wright all together.
Yeah. So, okay. So I guess we are a group. I put Cliff Avril first, KJ second. KJ Wright's ability to sniff out a screen is legendary.
Right.
And teams just stopped trying to throw screens against Seattle because KJ was always right there to shut it down. He was so good. He was never the most athletic guy. That was the rub on him coming out of college, but you couldn't get him off the field. He was too good. He was just the perfect complement to Bobby Wagner there in the middle. And they were a fantastic duo.
How do you think history will look at KJ Wright? for the franchise, whether it's on the Ring of Honor or do you think he's going to have a hard time getting up there? Is he just fall short?
Ring of Honor, I think he belongs.
I do too.
Anything else, he's not going to get there because he's always going to be seen as Bobby Wagner's, like he's Robin to Bobby Wagner's Batman, and nobody cares about Robin, right? But it could be worse. He was instrumental in those great defenses. He really was such an important part there in the middle, and I mean, that's why he's where on my list. He's above Michael Bennett.
So you had Cliff Avril at 5, KJ Wright at 6, and Michael Bennett at 7?
Yes.
Yeah. And to me, those are really close, depending on how you view the importance of those positions for your defense and you add up all the, the little things and so forth. But I agree. I mean, all three of those players were instrumental, extremely fun to watch. KJ Wright has always been labeled as underrated, and he went out of the league essentially as just being underrated. And it'll always be viewed, I think, that way a little bit. And just because of Bobby Wagner's presence.
One of the things that, when he left Seattle, because his contract ended, they didn't get cut or anything. Seattle said, they didn't want to bring him back because they were moving to this bare front and needed additional speed and wanted to go do some different things on defense. He left and went to Oakland, and Oakland, their off the field was such a disaster with John Gruden getting fired and all this other stuff. There's just drama. Not even Oakland. It's in Vegas. But it was all this crazy that happened. It was the Raiders. And there were two people who were credited for keeping that locker room together so they could continue to play good football and make the playoffs. And it was Carr on offense and KJ Wright on defense. And so this was this guy that just joined the team right at the start of training camp and whatever, ended up being the glue that held that team together, which tells you a lot about the type of person KJ Wright is.
I agree.
And why I think that he deserves to, if he decides that he's done, the Seahawks need to sign him to the 1-day contract and let him retire as a Seahawk. He deserves it. And he deserves to be in the Ring of Honor.
All right. When is this list going to get interesting, Keith? Come on now. We've had the same players now through 7. We just had to mix up in order.
Yeah. Is this the point on the order?
Is this the point?
Yes, because I think I've got a player, my next one, that you won't even have on your list in your top 10.
All right. Who is it?
Bruce Irvin.
Wow. I don't have Bruce on even my my makeup list. My after the show 5. He's not even on that list.
That's interesting. Bruce Irvin is unheralded because he was drafted to be Cliff Avril, and he wasn't going to be Cliff Avril. He didn't have the right makeup, right body type. He had the speed, but not much else.
Or instincts.
So the team moved him to outside linebacker and made him do a lot of things. He would set the edge against offensive tackles and get up and make plays. He had to cover. He had to rush the passer. He was this jack of all trades that did everything. And they have essentially, since he left, had a revolving door of players trying to mimic what Bruce Irvin did and fail at it.
Why did they let him leave then?
Money. He got paid way more than the team could give him. This was when the team was trying to pay Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor and Michael Bennett and give these guys that next contract, and everyone wanted a pay raise. Somebody had to go. And Bruce Irvin was let go. And all he did was go on and be good elsewhere. So eventually he came back for, part of a season and had some injury issues, and that never really worked out either. But he became a prototype that this team has been looking for and has not been able to find since the day he left, to the point where now they're changing the defense so they don't need to try and find another Bruce Irvin.
Interesting. Yeah. Or Cliff Avril.
Yeah. I mean, really, it comes down to those two guys. You can't, they just have not found that guy. And so they're like, we got to do something different because there are no other Cliff Avril and Bruce Irvins out there. And that's why I think he belongs on this list, because he was impactful in the way the defense was built, the way that it performed, and then what the team looked for in players after he left.
Yeah. Well, here's one of them. I mean, and this guy is in the pile more on the Michael Bennett side. And I put Frank Clark as my number 8 overall player. Just because they drafted him to kind of replace those guys. And I thought that he initially struggled in that role and then really excelled in that role, to the point where the team couldn't afford to keep him because he just outperformed expectations. And I don't know. I think mentally, I don't think that he was the right fit for Pete Carroll. For some reason, there was some conflict there where it was a maturity level or something, but they didn't. I don't think that they necessarily. The argument was at the time that John Schneider didn't want to pay a rush defensive end, top end money, and I don't think that was necessarily the case. I think it was specific to
Frank Clark.
Frank Clark.
And, he went on to Kansas City and had a couple of really good years, and then has had a couple of bad years. And
and some off-field stuff.
Lots of off-field stuff. And I think that's where the Seahawks got scared off from him. His on-field performance was very good. It was a short time in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And he did not make my list. In part just because I felt that, was he better at what he did than Michael Bennett?
No.
Michael
But
Bennett was
one year. I will say this: the year where he had like 12 sacks and a whole bunch of tackles for loss and a whole bunch of quarterback hits beyond that. Man, that year was pretty special. I will say that. Now that may have outperformed anything that Michael Bennett did in one single season.
He had one special year, two good years, and one he was a rookie and trying to figure out the NFL.
Correct.
And that was his Seahawk tenure, whereas Michael Bennett was here for a much longer period of time, and with the exception of maybe that 1 year, was better than Frank Clark during all of that. So he was drafted to replace Michael Bennett and never really did.
Yep. Agree.
And
all right, so who is your number 8? Or did we talk about that already?
Yeah, we already. So we're on to Brandon Mebane as my number 9.
Number 9, Brandon Mebane. Yeah, yep. He made my just missed list.
Oh, that hurts me. That he wouldn't make your list, but
he's number 11.
Okay, I'll give you that. No, Mebane was the guy in the middle. And
so let's talk about Mebane. Like, what was his era? Like, he was a previous player before Pete Carroll landed.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, he was drafted during the Mike Holmgren years. Was here through Mora into Pete Carroll, and even through that first phase of there were some players that either carried over or came in right when Pete Carroll did that only lasted a couple of years, and then we're on it. And Mebane continued to stick around into the middle parts of the Pete Carroll era, and then finally just again this team was getting progressively more expensive to keep together because there were just so many good players, and they ended up having to let some of them go. And all Mebane did was move on and be great elsewhere.
To the Chargers. Yep.
Yeah. Not a guy that, he's not flashy. He's just really good. Yeah. Although when he did get a sack, which he would get a few, the belly roll is like, God, it's like famous now. Like you see other people mimic him doing that. It's crazy, but fun. So,
no, I agree that he needed to be on this list. I just the next 2 players I'm going to talk about, and you're going to have a problem with one of them.
Probably.
I put ahead of him, and not because of the length of time that he overall played here. I think I'm talking about specifically the time that he played under Pete Carroll.
Okay.
That's the way I kind of viewed it. So my number 9 is Quandary Diggs. Quandary Diggs came here as an unheralded player. He performed great with the Lions, but they let him go. They made him available. The Seahawks
for a 5th round pick.
For a 5th round pick. He's a Pro Bowl level guy. But and then he came here and he proved that again that he is. And he ended up, I think he's led the team in interceptions over the last three years. And he's kind of the quarterback of the defense, especially now with Bobby Wagner gone. I mean, you might say Jordan Brooks is there, but Quandary Diggs does everything on the back end that you could ask that's not named Earl Thomas. And I think that he deserves to be on this list.
He almost didn't make my list of my honorable mentions. He's my 15th guy out of 15.
Fair.
Because with 10, and then
these guys, yeah, there's 6 or 7 players here that I think are interchangeable.
Yeah, and he almost didn't make it. Not that any of the things that you said were wrong. I just have other guys on this list that I think were more impactful to the team over the tenure of Pete Carroll's time. Now that may be different 3 years from now when Quandary Diggs is still playing here. I'm just saying as of right now.
So who are did you have a 9 or a 10?
My 9 was Mebane. We already talked about. My number 10 was Chris Clemons.
Chris is number 12 on my list.
Chris Clemons, one of the first moves that Pete Carroll made when he got into town was he traded someone.
I can't even remember his name. Yeah, Daryl Tapp.
For who was, this young, thought to be a rising pass rusher, for this unknown outside linebacker that's way undersized, but they're going to have to play him. They're playing him at defensive end. And what is he doing? And this became like this.
I have to admit that trade initially was the weirdest thing. I just thought it was just kind of a weird thing because Daryl Tapp had yet kind of to prove himself. He'd kind of been here, but he really hadn't had an opportunity yet to fully, start or be the guy. And they traded this high upside guy at the time. I thought was kind of an upside guy for this guy, Chris Clemons, that was like, it just seemed weird because Chris Clemons really didn't seem like he'd done much prior. And then how are they going to use him here? He's really undersized, doesn't really fit. Go ahead, Keith.
No, I was going to say, instead, he became the focal point of the scheme as they were drawing it up with the elephant side and the Leo side, right? The Leo being this 7-tech / 9-tech outside linebacker / defensive end that became became the talking point about what Seattle's defense is, at least on the front part. It became about that position. And it became about Chris Clemons. And all he did was come in and show that you can use angles and attack angles to set an edge, even when you're not large. And with speed and technique, you could line up in the 9-tech way outside and get to the quarterback over and over and over again. And teams just didn't have an answer for him. And he changed a lot of what the NFL looked for. No one had heard of a Leo before Pete Carroll came to Seattle. And all of a sudden the draft community was full of, right? Is this guy a Leo? Is he not a Leo? Does he have to play on a linebacker? Can you move him to a Leo spot? Right. It became the talk of the draft and everything is who's going to be, this team's Leo, this team needs a Leo, whatever. That was all from Chris Clemons. And he got to do that for 3 years in Seattle, which wasn't that long before, he got let go because they already had Cliff Avril there. And, again, finances. And he just went on and was good for a couple more years elsewhere and then decided he was done. So, but yeah, he really just changed the vernacular of what defenses are and look for.
Yeah. Interesting. So my number 10 is Jamal Adams. And this is the one that's controversial over like a Brandon Mebane or somebody, because Jamal Adams hasn't done really anything yet. And he had one great production year with the sacks, and that's why he's on my list, because that 1 year you mentioned the fact that he changed everything about the position, and he kind of did that. He set the all-time sack record for a defensive back.
How many sacks did he have the following year?
They used him in Wade. He had 9 to set the record. They used him he didn't even have a quarterback hit, I don't think, the second year.
He did not even have a quarterback hit the following year. So he didn't really change much, did he?
Well, yeah. Go have a conversation with Ken Norton. But it's interesting because this pick on here for me is almost just potential. It's not. It's just one of those things where it doesn't necessarily line up with reality. But I figured I needed to have him on this list because I do believe that he's worthy of being in the conversation as a top 10 defensive player overall in Pete Carroll's era.
Didn't make my top 15.
And
didn't make my honorable mention list.
See, there we go. Told you it was controversial. Brandon Mebane and Chris Clemons were next on my, so 11 and 12. We're done with our list, by the way. Now we're getting on into the weeds a little bit, but that's okay. So I've got 3 players remaining on my after the show mention list.
I have 4 that we have not talked about.
Why don't you go?
My number 11 is Poona Ford.
I've got him at 13.
Who has been Brandon Mebane since Brandon Mebane left. It's just, essentially just plug and play. He's the same guy, minus the belly rolls. Reed. Jaron Reed.
I've got him as 15.
I got him at 12. His ability to get pressure on the inside was very inconsistent. He was not as good against the run as he needed to be, all of that, but he still got pressure up the middle, often enough to impact games. Brandon Browner is my number 13.
No, we diverge here.
Yeah. Brandon Browner was awful for the first 5 games that he was a Seahawk, and then he became a Pro Bowler. And
which is crazy. And I think it was just, and quite honestly, I'll disagree with you here. I just think that was a situational situation by the circumstances that he found himself surrounded by all these Hall of Fame players.
I don't know.
I don't know, man, because he never duplicated it again, never even came close.
Well, he did go to New England and win a title with them, in part because, Jermaine Kearse
he helped them
job and block.
He helped them diagnose Seattle's offense.
Yeah, but he was a difference maker in that game. He shut down. Was it Williams who had that massive first half and then got exactly 0 afterward because they switched who was covering on him, and then he was a large reason why Seattle didn't win that second Super Bowl, because he wasn't there. But he was like Sherman. He was transformational in terms of what was allowed to be a cornerback. He was 6'4", 230. There never been cornerbacks that size since the 70s. And he showed he could play and he could do it, and you got to have the right system and all that kind of stuff. But he was a really important part to the initial part of the Legion of Boom.
Out of the 15, you only have 2 current players. Is that correct? And 1 in the top 10?
I have Poona Ford and
Quandary Diggs, or did Diggs not make your list?
Quandary Diggs is my 15th. So yeah. I have none in the top 10 and 2 in my honorable mentions.
Interesting. I've got Jordan Brooks as my 14th player. Just because
I thought about
of what he did last year. His rookie campaign was okay, but last year he set the record for the franchise record for tackles, led the league in tackles, and looks like he's just on his way to being the next great defensive player for Seattle. So I figured he needed to be in the conversation anyway.
He would have been my number 16 with Frank Clark being my number 17 because I want to see it for one more year. He's had 2 years. That's it.
Yeah.
So let's continue to watch it. Notice I'm down to 17 and I still haven't got to Jamal Adams.
Right. I know. What a disappointment. I have to say, I agree with you. It's just one of those things.
And so much of that has to do with Ken Norton Jr.
And injury.
True. But a lot of it has to do with Ken Norton Jr. If Ken Norton Jr. would have done anything competently, we would probably have a different attitude around.
Well, I know the little snippy little comment you made about what did he have the year after he had the 9 sacks?
Yeah,
and it's and I said go talk to Ken Norton, and it's true. It's like it wasn't anything Jamal. It wasn't anything Jamal did.
No. But you were just saying it was transformational. It changed how teams did stuff, except for that it didn't, because the next year they didn't do any of that.
I know.
It was transformational for just that one season.
I'm so disappointed.
Yeah.
Because I think that's truly Jamal Adams' role in the NFL, to be completely honest. He's got the shoulder thing he's trying to protect. He's not going to ever be an edge setting kind of a strong safety. He's never going to be that overwhelming, dominant physical force. Even though he's 210 pounds, 212 pounds, 6 foot, he's just not, he wants to be physical. He wants to be that player, but from now on, and even in the past, he's protected his shoulders. And now with 2 surgeries, he's going to be making some business decisions, and he's got his contract. And so I don't know how they're going to use him. They're pretty excited. I mean, when you listen to Desai and Carl Scott, they're pretty excited about having a player like Jamal. I just don't know how they're going to use him if it's beyond a traditional strong safety role.
Yeah, using him as a deep safety the way Ken Norton did for much of last year is a waste of his talent. Asking him to be a strong safety that doesn't play in the box and do the stuff that he likes to do is a waste of his talents. But asking him to do those things says you're only going to play 12 games a year because you're going to get hurt. Because he just body isn't holding up to that style of play. So are they I know they're excited because he's a special athlete, and there's a reason why he was a first team All-Pro before Seattle traded for him. And then he was I think it was a second team All-Pro after 1 year with Seattle because of all the sacks, but they're not getting value from what they traded and what they're paying him. They're not getting enough out of that money. And so they're really at a spot where he could be looking at his last year in Seattle this year, unless he has a big year, because they're getting to a point in his contract where they can get out from underneath it. And I could see them wanting to.
I agree. But even with all that said, I think he's in the conversation as a top 10 talent for the last 10, 12 years. He's that special. If he can stay healthy, and some of that's luck and, just hitting guys the right way and all that kind of stuff. And maybe he works on some technique stuff that can help him overcome some of that, jarring shoulder stuff. If he wraps up, tacklers instead of trying to hit them with his shoulder, leading with his shoulder, maybe he can lengthen his career. But yeah, that's why I see them using him more as a guy that they blitz. in blitz packages and so forth, instead of maybe Jordan Brooks. Maybe they drop Jordan Brooks back into coverage, or Cody Barton more, if they leave Cody Barton in there.
The team seems to want Cody Barton in there.
Maybe they leave Cody in there and they bring Jordan Brooks out, which I think would be a mistake.
No, they would leave both of them in there.
And not have Jamal in there at all as a dime.
No, you could have all three of them. Well, when you're playing your nickel, yeah, you'd have all of them. When you go to the dime and you pull out another linebacker, then yeah, you probably either pull Barton or you move Brooks up to a defensive end and leave Barton in.
I'm just wondering where Jamal Adams fits in this scheme, in this 3-4 thing that they're going to do. I mean, I just don't know.
Yeah, I agree. We'll see, but the contract they gave him dictates that he's going to be on this roster.
Yeah,
and you know that they traded for him. They gave up what they did. They paid him what they did because he can be a difference maker. He can be a tilt the field kind of guy. He was a first team All-Pro before joining Seattle, and he's still young.
He's only like
25.
My problem is, Keith, is that this defense dictates a lot of too high safety dropbacks, and he's one of them. So to me, and from what I've heard Carl Scott say, he thinks that Diggs and Adams are interchangeable, quote unquote, interchangeable on the back end.
They're interchangeable in that Diggs can come up and play strong safety. We saw that at the end of the year.
Yeah, but I don't think that's what he was saying.
We saw that at the end of the year when he did come up and play strong safety, and Ugo Amadi had to be the free safety. But asking Adams to drop back and do the stuff that Quandary Diggs does on the back end is asking for failure.
Well, as a single high guy, I agree. But if in a too high situation, maybe Jamal Adams plays better in that.
We saw that last year. It didn't work.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of that in the first half of the season last year. It didn't work.
Interesting.
So
I don't know. Anyway, we're getting off.
Yeah, we are
off the range now. So fun show. Bobby Wagner, number 1. On the other side, Russell Wilson. That's the way it's going to be for a while. Those two names are going to be entrenched as the best players Seattle's had in a long time, I think.
Yeah, they are. You have to go back to, Cortez Kennedy, who played in the early 90s, and Steve Largent, who joined the team when they
and Walter Jones,
formed.
possibly.
Oh yeah, well, okay, Walter Jones, that's a good one too. But again, the guy that played into the early 90s, and it's been a while since the team has had that caliber of player.
Yeah,
and now they're both gone.
Yeah, interesting. All right, let's get out of here. We're going to do a whole bunch of shows between now and training camp that are just kind of obscure, move the season along. We're going to have a question and answer show, as we do every year, that revolves on some beer tasting. That'll be fun. We'll have to work out exactly the parameters of that this year. Last year, it was I think it was required that we try beers that we've never had before or something like that.
We did IPAs last year, didn't we?
IPAs, yeah, we did. And as a matter of fact, we did hazy. What is that?
New England style.
New England style, and then West Coast style, which is the clear stuff. Is okay. And so this year, maybe we do something completely off the rails. I don't know. We'll have to decide that. We'll have to decide that. Yeah.
I've got some weird off the rails beers for us to try, but I don't know how I'm going to get them to you, because
I know, right?
Shipping alcohol across state lines is sort of illegal. So,
I was thinking, I sent you a list of some topic ideas, and we're fairly well set for the next few weeks. But I thought maybe we'd have an early 53-man roster projection show too, just for some fun.
Just before training camp starts.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and see how that lines up with the real roster at the end of camp. Okay, so let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter @MyersNFL. You can find me @MWChawk. Find the show, favorite podcast app, YouTube, subscribe, all that good stuff. Until next time.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWSeahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.